time travel. This concept is always met with great contempt, and for good reason. Typically speaking, it isn't always handled the best whenever it's implemented, which normally leads to breaks within the continuity. Even so, if I'm correct in my analysis, Boruto might be able to pull it off in a way that would elevate the material instead. You see, while it might not seem to be the case, I believe that Boruto has been messing with the timeline, whether he knows it or not. This mainly stems from this instance in chapter 75 when Boruto is able to see into the future. They showed Kawaki in his Otsutsuki state looking down at Boruto with blood splattered on his face. By the way, we know he's looking at Boruto since Boruto's visions are shown from his perspective. So the logical assumption was that this was when Kawaki sliced Boruto's eye. Yet that didn't actually happen since Kawaki never used this form in their battle, nor did blood splatter on him. Now some have argued that this was supposed to happen, but Ada changed it by using omnipotence, which could make sense. The issue with this is that the event took place after the fight happened. Not only that, but this perspective of Kawaki was shown during the fight, but it was prior to Boruto losing his eye. So it's pretty clear that the events of the fight wasn't changed by omnipotence. The only argument you could make is that a second fight was supposed to happen, but that was changed due to omnipotence. And though this is definitely a possibility, I doubt that's the case. What I believe happened is that Boruto changed the timeline long before the fight itself took place. You see, there's one consistent rule you must follow when messing with time, which is that your past self or anyone from your past mustn't become aware of your future. That's because any minor change or deviation from what was supposed to happen can affect what is to happen. In this case, the person who holds the knowledge of the future while existing in the past is Boruto himself. So anything Boruto does with that information can then affect the original outcome. In fact, Boruto doesn't need to actively do anything. Just by having the knowledge of these events taking place can affect the decisions he makes down the line. So in theory, Boruto could inadvertently change the timeline by simply waking up too early, taking a different route home, or just by stopping to think about something he shouldn't know about. So suffice to say that the events that took place after Boruto saw those visions is likely what led to the change in the future timeline. By the way, you remember when I said that these visions Boruto saw were from his perspective? Well, that's not actually the case, or that wasn't the case initially. You see, we already knew that Momoshiki couldn't see his own future since he stated as much. Yet, at the same time, we excused our initial conclusion that Boruto saw his own future because it's possible that he was able to just tap into Momoshiki's vision, which made perfect sense at the time. Though if you look at it with a bit more clarity, it doesn't actually line up. In fact, the only way this would make sense is if Boruto saw Momoshiki's memories of the future he saw initially. Instead, what actually happened, which was pretty clear, is that Boruto activated Momoshiki's Byakugan and peered into the future himself. In fact, Momoshiki outright confirms this when he said, "Even if in fragments, it seems you were able to see the same tableau that I did." This means that Boruto himself saw the future, or a possible future, the same possible future Momoshiki himself saw. The only difference is that Boruto didn't see his own future. The future he saw was that of Kawaki's. You see, this all goes back to the point of Momoshiki not being able to see his own future, which likely means that this is a limitation of the ability itself. Now you could say that Boruto just magically doesn't have this limitation for whatever reason, but it might also be the case that he does, and the visions he saw wasn't his. To understand what I mean by this, let's go back to chapter 75 when Boruto initially had these visions. First one we saw was that of someone looking at the Okage monument. Then to the left of that we had some random Jonins having a conversation. One of them asked if they found him, then later states that he couldn't have gotten that far as yet, and then later said that they shouldn't let him escape. Now this panel might seem inconsequential since these are just random Jonins, but trust me when I say that it's actually the most consequential one of all the panels shown. You see, everyone thought that this was Boruto's future vision being relayed to him, mostly because all of these events ended up playing out in the end. We saw the scene with Shikadai play out and Boruto was on the other side. We also saw the scene with Mitsuki play out and Boruto was on the receiving end in that instance as well. So the logical conclusion must then be that these visions are from Boruto's perspective, right? Well, not necessarily. You see, even though those panels ended up coming to fruition, one of them didn't and the other one pretty much confirms this theory to be true. You see, the panel in question, as I mentioned before, is the one of the random Jonins having a conversation whilst looking for someone. Now, we initially assumed that they were looking for Boruto, and this was also shown from his perspective as well. Yet I did some digging and couldn't find a single scene where Boruto was present in that lines up with the dialogue used by these ninjas. I was able to find the Mitsuki one and I was able to find the one with Shikadai, yet the one with these Jonins looking for someone wasn't there. Well, it is there, but it actually isn't there for Boruto. You see, I was able to find this panel, but these guys weren't in the presence of Boruto, as I stated before. The person's perspective this was taken from is actually Kawaki. We saw this in chapter 79 when Kawaki ran out of chakra, which prevented him from maintaining his shrunken state. That is when he saw those random Jonins having the conversation Boruto envisioned in chapter 75. This simply means that the future Boruto saw wasn't his own, but Kawaki's. By the way, this makes perfect sense since Kawaki was sitting next to Boruto when the ability was triggered, which means that he likely tapped into Kawaki's future similar to what Momoshiki did to Boruto. Now, I know this might sound crazy and you guys are probably clicking off the video by now, but hear me out because it ties back into my theory that the timeline was indeed altered. Now, to understand what I mean by this, we first need to understand that there are three separate timelines at play here. The original timeline Momoshiki saw where Boruto lost everything and he was able to gain control of his body. Then we have the second timeline where Boruto didn't lose everything, mainly due to Sarada sending Sasuke to protect him, which is the current timeline. And then we have the third timeline, which is what Boruto saw in chapter 75, where it depicted Kawaki standing above someone with blood splattered on his face. In this timeline that was supposed to take place, Kawaki actually succeeded in killing Boruto. So to now put this in order so you can get the sequence of events, Momoshiki initially saw a timeline where he won in chapter 80 of the original manga, but we know as the audience that this wasn't going to last based on the events of the time skip shown in chapter 1. So even in the original timeline, Boruto eventually regained control of his body. And just to clarify, the reason why I believe that this scene is a part of the original timeline is because Boruto doesn't have the black marking on his chest. Now the reason why I know that this isn't the case, even though we can see his chest in the preview itself, is because he doesn't have the extended piece on his neck. As you can see, Boruto post-resurrection has two black markings on his neck when the Karma Seal is active, and one of them remains on his neck even when the Karma Seal isn't active. Yet in this scene, Boruto only has one mark, not two. Now, you could just use the typical arguments and say that, this is just a design change and we shouldn't look too deep into it, blah 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 blah, but when you have supplementary evidence of this change being deliberate, you shouldn't ignore it. So what all of this could mean is that in the original timeline, Boruto didn't suffer through the events of chapter 67, where he had to be revived by Momoshiki, which could then mean that in the original timeline, Boruto was able to suppress Momoshiki after the fight with Code. He then went on to lose everything in chapter 80 but regained it later on, thus him not having the karma mark on his neck. So what this also could mean is that the timeline where Boruto got stabbed by Kawaki is already an alternate timeline. The future has already been changed. So again, this second timeline is what Boruto saw in chapter 75 when he peered into Kawaki's future. All of those events were supposed to happen to Kawaki, not Boruto, mainly because all of this took place after Kawaki succeeded in killing him atop the Akage monument. That is why the panel with the Jonins is something Kawaki experienced. It's his future, not Boruto's. Now, as I said before, there's also a third timeline since the future was altered once again. That's why the scene with Kawaki didn't take place. It isn't a plot hole or just a design change, it's the future itself changing. You see, I personally believe that this second change happened when Kawaki was about to strike Boruto in chapter 79. Boruto was dead to rights, he was wide open, he was about to die. That's when Kawaki would have activated the horn state to show his full descent into madness, or to just finish off Boruto. Either way, this all changed when Sarada intervened. She wasn't supposed to be there. So it is likely that in a prior timeline, Sarada just didn't get there in time. By the way, this all lines up with the anime and the manga since Toneri mentioned that Boruto's true enemy is fate itself. And it's also mentioned by Jura in chapter 4 of TBV. So it could be the case that the one who helped Boruto to avert this dark future is Sarada, the one who conveniently shows up whenever shit hits the fan, as seen atop the Akage monument or when she asks Sasuke to save him. It actually might be the case that those theories about Sarada having the power to change fate itself is indeed true. Or it could also be the case that she can manipulate time. This would make perfect sense since her Mangekyo took the form of the sun, which typically represents time itself. By the way, this all goes back to chapter 1 where Boruto said, "I guess this was the only possible outcome." This implies that Boruto tried to prevent this from happening, but it happened anyway, which means that Boruto later becomes aware of this fate as well. It also ties into Boruto knowing about the true horrors of the Ten Tails and the dark future he's trying to prevent. It all goes back to Boruto's enemy or main villain being fate itself. With that said, it could just be that Boruto can see the future of everyone, as in like it doesn't have to be from his purview, he just sees things that's happening in the vicinity. So it could explain why he was able to see the thing with Kawaki even though he wasn't there for it. But again, that's stretching the ability beyond what was explained, but it could be the case, okay? So what do you guys think? Do you think it makes sense? Do you think Boruto is changing the future by making incremental accidental decisions that didn't happen in the original timeline that's changing the outcome of the timeline to match a different timeline or different multiple timelines, whatever. This could get convoluted pretty quickly, which is why time travel is always pretty scary to tap into when writing a story. You know, it could also be something tied to Sarada. Maybe Sarada is the one doing something unknowingly. You know, that could also be the case. I mean, she did activate her Mangekyo Sharingan in chapter 80 and we haven't seen it since. It could be the case that she isn't even aware that she activated it, okay? That could be the case. But with that said, let me know your thoughts down below. Drop a like if you like the video and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.